Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Geesaman Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather, we live in extraordinary ones, where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives and beings to share resources that can help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes, our 13-month depth training, Refugia, and sign up for our beautiful newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. We are 100% listener-funded and ad-free and invite you to consider becoming a supporter of this podcast with a donation. You can find more at embodimentmatters.com/podcast.
So welcome, dear listeners. We are so excited to be here. It's me, Carl, with my beloved Erin, and this is going to be the first of a series of 3 podcasts connected to the 13-month Refugia training that's coming up. And we're going to be exploring practices of presence, practices of depth and soul, and practices of reconnection and remembrance, and why they matter and how they're interconnected. And as we are talking about practices of presence in this podcast, we thought we would start with the experience of presence and a little drop in to begin. So, if you like, you can make yourself as comfortable as possible. And just notice wherever you are right now, whether you're driving or sitting or walking, could you bring some attention to the connection that you have with the ground, to this feeling of being supported by this living earth? And just to include that as a ever-present living relationship. And then could you open attention through the whole field of body sensations, just to feel the distance between the front of yourself and the back of yourself, the sides, your whole volume. And just notice if there's any place that you could maybe find 3% less effort. You could just feel a little bit more at ease, soften some kind of density or rigidity. And then with the ground and with this receptivity to your bodily sensations, could you also open through your other sensory gates, to open through hearing, to open through vision, open through the tastes or smells that are present? And here we are, talking about practices of presence. It's always so close. We can be off a million miles away on some thought or imagination or worry, and the ground is just right here. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Erin to talk a little bit more about Refugia.
Thank you for that, Carl. We are so excited about this training program that we have been cooking up for years and are really thrilled to begin. And as Carl said, it weaves together many of the facets of our lineage and our work. And we're starting today with practices of presence. I want to just say a little bit about this multidimensional sacred curriculum that we're weaving in this training that supports our embodied wisdom and our grounded presence. So we're able to bring our unique soul medicine forth in service to the suffering world, our communities, our families, and ourselves. Our intention is really to support people during these what one online friend calls the VDTs, these very difficult times, so that rather than burning out, we could actually become more deeply rooted, more somatically and soulfully resourced. So that's the intention of this training. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, in a beautiful piece of writing I'm sure many of you have been exposed to many years ago, reminded us we are made for these times. And our intention is that this training ensures that these times are also making us, rather than collapsed into fear and despair, making us into the most authentic and wise and soulful versions of ourselves. And of course, a foundation for that is presence, right? So I'm really excited to talk about this. And if you haven't heard the story about where the name Refugia comes from, I'll just say that I had the pleasure several years ago of interviewing one of my hero writers, Kathleen Dean Moore, on our podcast. She is the one who exposed me to this word through her beautiful writings in her book called Great Tide Rising. And I also repeat the story a little bit in our conversation with our dear friend Alexandre Joden in a recent podcast called Becoming Refugia. So Carl, let's keep going. We've got a lot. We're full of it about practices of presence, and we're so excited to share and drop in together.
Yeah, and I'll just add that whether or not you're drawn to this training, the principles behind what we're going to be talking about on these three podcasts, we hope are of value to you, and we'll be sprinkling in little practices so that we're not just talking about, but we're really tasting why these practices matter. And I'll just say with practices of presence right at the start, it's um it's challenging because there are so many factors pulling us away from this moment. And if we even look at how much evolutionary change has happened in these last 30 years and how much of our interaction with the world is through screens and how much information we are invited to process on a daily basis, the simplicity of inhabiting this body, this sensory moment, this place is so different than it has been for our entire evolutionary history, like way, 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 way back. The changes that we're experiencing are magnificent and challenging. So, uh, that's one of the reasons why learning to inhabit practices of presence are so important.
Yes, we're so lucky to have been blessed with a lot of teachings and learnings over many years. And I guess, you know, one thing that comes to me right now as I'm hearing you, Carl, is just naming that presence is a practice of return, right? As my teacher, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, said, it's like these short glimpses repeated many times. And I think when we're caught up in perfectionism, we can think we need to stay present all the time. And um, that doesn't help, because we lose it and we come back. And it's really that practice of return, of homecoming, again and again. So I just want to bring right now as another invitation, wherever you are, if you're cleaning or washing dishes, as I often am when I'm listening to podcasts, or wherever you might be, sitting or resting in bed, I want to name that the wonderful late Thich Nhat Hanh said, I was so moved to read this. He said that the cream of his practice, after decades and activism and all the work he brought forth with engaged Buddhism, is this: I'm home. I have arrived. So let's just take a moment again to feel your own precious temporary body and just this breath, and letting yourself taste, or maybe even taste the possibility of, I'm home in this body, in this present moment, in this spot on the earth. And, this was a teaching from someone who lived as a refugee outside of his home place of Vietnam for most of his life. And the core of his practice, I'm home. I have arrived. So I just love this as an invitation to coming back to this sense of belonging and having already arrived,
Mm,
Presence is not a self-improvement project. It's homecoming
mm.
and remembering. So of course this connects with our conversation about remembering as well.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the term Jaya John uses of homefulness instead of mindfulness, and that
Mhm.
sense of we can just inhabit this natural sense of belonging in this body as an earthling on this living being.
And why this matters, there's countless reasons, but I'm thinking right now of our friend Russell Delman, who used this beautiful phrase, a poignant phrase, I guess I should say, about the commonness of having a drive-by life. Like we're moving so fast and we can be so lost in thought or judgment or analysis of the present moment that it's like a drive-by. I've heard so many people say they often feel like there's a veil between them and the present moment or our lives, and having ways to actually feel our lives because you know what? They're passing and we don't get to be here for long. And so having this homecoming just right now in this moment to see what we see with our eyes, hear what we hear with our ears. I'm hearing bird song, the finches at the feeder out front, to feel this breath deep in your belly. Again and again, coming back to just landing is so profound. And as you said, there's so much speediness and noise and information. So the radical act it is just to pause, just to slow it down and sort of refuse that violence of urgency that so many of us live inside of. And just even for 3 seconds to feel this is my life is such a gift. And I guess I want to say also, it seems to me that any experience that we think is going to satisfy us, um, being loved or seeing beauty or feeling good in our body or having a sense of peace or joyfulness or whatever it is, it doesn't land if we're not present, if we're not in a state of presence where we can actually receive it and really let ourselves be touched by the
Yeah.
present moment. So I often use the phrase about becoming permeable to beauty and resilient to despair. And presence is such a foundational aspect of this.
Mm. Well, I think too, as you're talking, that presence makes us permeable to so much more than this moment, that within this moment of aliveness is the history of this place, are the ancestors, are the prayers of future beings, that there is a presence that can open to being connected to the whole universe, to being embedded in interbeing that goes beyond, but is experienced through this moment of sitting here.
Mhm. And I also love, as you're speaking of just the vastness of presence, it's not small, right? Including the past, the future. It's the vastness of being here. And without that, we can't do other than repeating the past, repeating the habits, repeating those well-worn neural grooves. And when we really land in this present moment, like right now, I want to invite us again, not conceptually, but like, could you feel this breath in your back? And just take a moment to notice actually the vastness that's right here.
Hmm. Yeah. And that really brings me to the importance of presence in movement as well. We're both longtime movement practitioners and teachers, and how important it is to learn to sense ourselves in how we move. And movement can be such a place where we objectify ourselves and check out from ourselves or where we can deepen intimacy. And this line that is repeated so often when we're teaching Feldenkrais lessons or other kind of movement of, is there a way that I could use less effort and find more pleasure in this movement? And the way that an inquiry like that requires us to be present, because we can't tell if we could find more ease or less effort if we're not feeling ourselves. But it also draws us in because it feels good to move in a way that's not objectifying, that listens, that has a sense of grace and also relationship to the living world around us, that we're not a separate body object moving in relation to separate object things, but we are process and we are relationship. And that also changes how we function, that our back will be longer. We won't shorten as much in our neck. We won't uh, crank on ourselves because we're reaching for some object out there. But there's a self-organization that can come when we learn to pay attention to ourselves and movement.
I just want to say that one more time again, because we bring this so often in our classes, and I always have this hope that this can be infectious, almost like a virus spreading out there and staying with you. And that is, how could I reduce unnecessary effort and increase pleasure right now? And then again, whether you're lifting groceries or a child or on a run or rolling over in bed, how could I reduce unnecessary effort and increase pleasure? And that question is such a wonderful invitation to presence through the soft animal of our bodies. And thank you to Mary Oliver for that gorgeous language of the soft animal. You know, that also makes me think, Carl, of something we talk about all the time, which is um, there is research that um, comes, I would guess, is this anthropological research. Mircea Eliade at the University of Chicago, who studied ancient cultures, made this really interesting point that blew my mind when I first heard this. And we think about it often. And he said that in human history, I have some questions about this part. He says pre-agriculture, I would say, indigenous cultures, earth-connected cultures, because I know that is not a dividing line in my experience of those cultures. But that ancient humans and earth-connected humans, and even current humans who live in that way, the orientation toward how to have a good life, how to live well, is about connection. And then, his idea is that post-agriculture, and again, I have some questions about that because I see some real deep connections in indigenous cultures that are agricultural, but that the orientation became about improvement. And how can I improve this land and my body and my mind and my partner and this moment, which can really disconnect us. And one of the paradoxes that I love so much is that through practices of presence, when we're not coming at them as an improvement project, through really orienting toward connection right now with this body, let's do it, let's feel it with that question of how could I reduce some effort and increase some pleasure, maybe 5% more comfortable right now. As we get more connected, improvement happens,
Mm.
but not through domination of self, other, world, through connection. So practices of presence of so many kinds really align us with the intelligence of nature, not just the dominating human mind that has an idea of how it should be and needs to improve. And there's something so wonderful about that, that coming home to this aligning with the intelligence of the earth, you could say, this creative energy, when we're oriented toward connection rather than improvement.
Yeah. And connection has this implicit satisfaction that feels like such a powerful antidote to the whether Watiko, Wendigo, hungry ghost, this kind of consuming, never enough virus that is so present in the world right now and consuming the aliveness of this planet that supports us. And what could happen in the world if there was more of a tuning toward satisfaction and connection rather than endless improvement?
I think of that with Bhutan, which is like maybe the only carbon negative country, and that they have such a high rate of happiness. You know, they're off the charts in the happiness scale. And isn't it interesting where that comes from? You know, less consumption, more connection,
Hmm.
carbon negative, you know? I think that's very fascinating. I'm also thinking about the traditional teaching attributed to the Buddha, which is the cure for all suffering is presence. And, you know, I don't know if I believe there's a cure for suffering, but I'm thinking years ago, we had this experience with our dear friend, hi, Matt, who crashed his scooter and asked for accompaniment. We went to pick him up in the canyon. He had, you know, gravel in his elbows and knees and took him to the emergency room. And I sat with him while he was in the very painful experience of having, you know, those wounds scrubbed out and gravel picked out of his body, and just in with these invitations to stay really close to the actual moment, to the actual present experience. And he was blown away by, you know, when we move even a little bit away from just what's happening, how anxiety can increase, fear, what does this mean? What does this mean for the future? And staying really close to the present moment, even in pain. I mean, I can speak to childbirth also. You know, it really, not that it's unpainful, but it shifts it immensely the more present we get, both the more intimate with the moment and the more spacious around it.
Hmm. Yeah, I want to speak about presence and listening and what it feels to be with someone who's listening, who is present for you. And it feels like this can go in so many directions. How we listen to ourselves through movement, how we are when we see each other at the end of the workday, how we listen to the plant beings around us. And I think so many of us could use a lot of learning in what it means to listen, to have inner listening to our body, and as you often use the term, the truth resonators and bullshit detectors that are always present if we tune toward them, um, or just to this profound act of being with another being and saying, like, I see you, I'm not trying to fix you, I hear what you're saying. Like, it feels like what we long for in each other and yet can be elusive.
Mhm. And I just want to say also, you know, this is one of the things we'll be working with during our time together in Refugia, the skill of being a listener to others is built on the foundation of presence and the skill at listening to our own inner world and our inner multitude. So if I can be with and listen to my own, oh, like anxiety or outrage that comes when I'm listening to someone I might disagree with what they're saying, I can be in this moment, listening inside myself, holding those energies. I always imagine like the great mother with the vast lap of compassion. And when I remember, I can be her and hold my outrage and hold my anxiety, or even hold the, I really want to say something about this right now, but just hold it. I'm listening in here, and that gives me the capacity to actually be able to hear you. Not that I disagree with you like that, Carl, most of the time, but to really listen and be willing to be touched and changed by what someone else is saying. And I just want to read this because this is, um, well, I just want to say I think it's beautifully said, even though I'm the one who wrote it, but it took a while to whittle this language down. One of the pieces we'll be working with in Refugia, this is our third learning segment, is 1,000 ways to listen, understanding the whole body as an exquisite instrument for listening, deepening intimacy with your inner world, with others, with the earth and with the more than human world and with the great mystery by vitalizing our embodied listening skills. Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm. So good.
It's so needed, isn't it, in the world today where we barely can listen to one another?
Yeah, and as you're speaking, Aaron, I this sense of how adult presence is so important in cultivating presence, like just what you were describing, that we are able to hold space for the inner young ones in there, or that we can be vast and that there's someone that is holding the space so that not everything gets to get the wheel and drive, and what a important capacity it is to grow adult presence, which is a theme that we could geek out on for a long time, but is always central really to anything that we're teaching.
I just want to name again the pause and how radical it is when things are speeding so much. I remember when I was first invited to work with a pausing practice, ground, sound, breath. Maybe we can do it right now. Carl did a version of this when we first started. But again, wherever you are, take a moment to feel your body weight, the weight of this temporary, precious body. And wherever you are, unless you're, on the moon or in outer space listening to this, there's gravity and something supporting you. And that's under your feet, if you're standing, under your butt, if you're sitting, under whatever part of your body, if you're lying down. And just take a moment to generously give your weight over to gravity so you can open to receive support. So this is ground. Let's take a pause to just feel that. Let it go a little deeper than words, giving weight, receiving the support that's right here always, letting ourselves be held. And then without disconnecting from that, so that was ground, then sound, we open to listening and noticing, presence is so much bigger than just this body. You're present to this living world. And also, when we're listening, we can sense that spacious openness all the sounds are coming and going inside of. So, ground and sound, let's see if we can stay with both of those and then add this breath. And maybe with this breath, we can also return to that question: how could I reduce some unnecessary effort? Maybe softening the belly or the jaw or the shoulders. Increase pleasure, ground, sound, breath. Thank you to Russell Delman and the Embodied Life Work, where we first learned that practice years ago. And what I was starting to say is, I remember making a little post-it note with ground, sound, breath on it and aiming to do that practice multiple times a day. When we're in the habit of the speediness and urgency of conventional life, it can feel like it takes the courage it would take to jump off a speeding train to slow down and do that practice for 30 seconds. And like, oh my God, I can't. And then we do it and like, oh, I did, I can. And it opens up, And I remember the early invitation we were given to try to do that 5 times a day. Maybe I'll offer that here if you're drawn to it. You could make a little post-it, ground, sound, breath, maybe 5 times a day. Over time, maybe it can grow to 4,372 times a day. And over time, it just becomes part of how we are connected with the ground, listening, breathing, and feeling that quality of presence. So I guess I just want to say also, as I'm talking about that and what can unfold over time and the courage it takes, is this is a practice. It's not one and done. For us, this is lifetime practice, deepening all the time. And I'm really so grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reminded of the word for meditation um, in Tibetan of gum, and translated as becoming used to. And I think it's an important distinction with practice and with learning when there's something that is natural, something that is inherent, and the practice is to just get used to it over and over again with these tiny glimpses. It's not that we are, trying to accumulate hours, but we are continuously tuning towards something that's natural. And I experience a similar thing in teaching movement, that when we can sense ourselves and fall back into this natural movement intelligence that we had as children, that all other beings in creation possess, it's a getting used to. It's a, like, what is keeping us hovering away from our own spacious presence, our own open heart, our own skillful capacity and movement.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. The returning and that there's something there to return to, that it's not, we have to improve or manage it. It's like that relaxing back into presence. I think that's so beautiful and so important that this is not another heroic, effortful, exhausting project, right? It's more about um, homecoming and relaxing back into this present moment. I want to mention while we're here too, refugia is a gorgeous word, biological word, these little protected places where life can thrive. And also, we have great appreciation for the word from the Buddhist context of refuge. And, you know, the times are the VDTs, the very difficult times. We're having quite the start to the year of 2026 here. It's like shocking every single day. And this longing for refuge. And the traditional teachings from the Buddhist perspective are about what are called the three jewels, taking refuge in Buddha, which doesn't mean taking refuge in, you know, a deity or the man who lived in India 2,600 years ago. Buddha just means awakeness, awake awareness. So finding refuge, whether your elbow's getting gravel scraped out of it or the news is so horrific, we feel stressed out, to come back home to presence and awake awareness is taking refuge in Buddha. And just to name the other two, Dharma, which is those teachings that help us remember and wake up and come home to presence, and Sangha, which is the community of others who are also trying to remember and come home and wake up and return to presence. I always want to add the word to this imperfectly, imperfectly. This is not about being perfect, and all kinds of permission for all of us to attempt and do it imperfectly and to keep going, and not give up.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of one of our teachers, Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, who said, "Do you want to know if your practice isn't working? Do you think it's a big deal?
Mhm.
And how can we approach practices to presence with humor and lightness and deep reverence simultaneously, but not making presence a big, heavy deal?"
Mhm. Amen to that. I love that so much. Big deal mind is so unnecessary and exhausting, isn't it? And also the reverence. Will you read that piece you were mentioning before about reverence and how that too is such a beautiful invitation to presence?
Oh, yes. So this is a quote from the great late Irish poet John O'Donohue. "What you counter, recognize, or discover depends to a great extent on your quality of approach. When you approach with reverence, great things approach you. The rushed heart and the angry mind lack the gentleness and patience to meet that moment."
Mm. Will you give us
There's
just the beginning one more time, what we encounter?
much in that. What you encounter, recognize, or discover depends to a great extent on your quality of approach. When you approach with reverence, great things approach you.
Mm,
And this just feels like how to live in a good way, how
mhm,
to be in relationship with all my relations. Can I approach with reverence and how the rushed heart and the arrogant mind block that opportunity?
mm. I'm remembering, this comes from John O'Donohue's book Beauty, and I'm remembering over the years we used to bring this to Feldenkrais workshops and, inviting that reverence of approach to just these gentle little movements of how you roll your head or lift your shoulder. And when we bring that reverence and quality of presence, how much opens up. And that mysterious truth, what I was pointing to before about getting more connected, improvement happens, but not from us making it happen, that organic intelligence with the homecoming. And I'm remembering how maybe some of you know our dear friend Francis Weller also loves this quote and has brought this to soul work and grief work. And I said, "Oh, Francis, before we even met each other, I pulled this quote out of the beauty book and was bringing it to my teachings." And we just said, "Oh, yeah, great minds think alike." And all praise to John O'Donohue for saying it so beautifully. That is also such a wonderful invitation to a quality that feels, I don't want to say absent, but like, gosh, we could sure turn the dial up on reverence in the
Mm.
world today. Um, yeah. I want to read one more piece, the way we've talked about this, about what we'll be doing in Refugia. And one where we're starting is with the embodied ground. Somatic foundations as the soul of embodied interbeing, unlocking forgotten doorways to presence and deepening intimacy with life. So, Carl and I, when we're teaching, we will often say, we don't start with the open heart. We actually start with presence and with the ground because you've got to get connected and land in this body and really get used to remembering that connection with the earth that's holding us right now. I'm giving my weight a little more generously as I speak those words to land in presence. This is the place we begin, and we will keep re-emphasizing, I know personally, every day for the rest of our lives and throughout our teachings. We've got to land in the present moment in this body so that we could learn and practice and open our hearts and practice reverence of approach and listen well and on and on. Um, yeah, you go next, babe. I know we both have a lot to say about that.
Well, I'll just say like I just found myself so lit up with you even reading those words, like, oh, that's our jam. Coming back to the ground. And it's been at the center of our practice and teaching for decades, and it still requires return, remembrance over and over again, self-touch, feeling my feet. As I'm saying this, you can also do this. Can you maybe just touch your leg to feel, oh yeah, I'm present down here. Can you feel your feet on the ground? How often through the day I'll just put a hand on my lower belly as a magnet for breath, for life force, just to refresh and not hold tightly, and then I lose it. And then I notice, oh, I can have the ground here. And how much the ground can help, again, in any situation. If it's an intense conversation you're having with someone, to add the ground. If it's a beautiful meal you're enjoying, oh, can you add the ground that I'm here? If it's a glorious sunset, if it's a devastating news headline, can I take that in with this foundation of the ground that does not end where my feet or my butt meet the earth, but there is this exchange, this rootedness of
Mhm.
something that extends down into the earth and something of the earth that is continuously coming up and animating our aliveness.
Mm. And I just want to emphasize, repeat in different words what you just said. Like, this is not about the ground as a thing, as an object, or something we think about. This is an invitation to come back home to this living relationship. And because it's a living relationship, it's like every time we do, it's fresh. It's surprising. So, oh yeah. And something shifts. It's not a concept. And I just want to name, as I wrote, somatic foundations as the soul of embodied interbeing. So, a lot of embodiment work can get very focused on this self and this body, which we need to do, right? Because many of us are not present and not at home. So we need to have a foundation of feeling these fingers and my butt in this chair and my feet on the ground, and my toes wiggling. But to return to that sense of interbeing, there is no body that's separate from the earth and from the water I just drank that's moving through me, that's connected with the local waterways, that will move maybe to where you are and listening to this, and this breath that we're sharing with the green world and with each other, and that's blowing on a breeze, maybe to where you are. Maybe I'm inhaling a breath you breathed out a week ago. Really to let the way we approach embodied practice not accidentally reinforce hyper-individualism and the loneliness of feeling separate from this beautiful, suffering, shimmering, alive planet Earth and each other, you know? Um, and I also want to say I had a conversation yesterday with a new acupuncturist I went to see, and she was asking me about my work, and I used the word somatics, and like many people in this day and age, she said, "How long have you been doing that?" And I said, "Oh, more than 30 years. Long ago, I even designed my own degree at the University of, um, what did I call it? Integrated somatics, approaches to the living body." So somatics is really it's a word that different than the word body, which might mean a corpse. Now I want to go off on the tangent of that language when people say bodies and white bodies and black bodies and bodies of culture. I appreciate the work of those people so much. I personally bristle because when you say bodies, it invites the image of a pile of corpses. We aren't bodies, we are embodied beings, we are living beings. And so somatic is a word that means this experience of aliveness, subjective experience as felt from inside. And the acupuncturist was asking questions that, like many people, um, thinks I do trauma-centered work. And while I want to offer deep bows to the people who carry trauma work as their practice and what they're doing, it is definitely needed in the world. Somatics is such a vast world beyond the nervous system and trauma healing. It's like when I hear that and people always assume we're just focused on trauma healing, it feels like having you know, a great rainbow palette of watercolors, and then you just use, blue, one of my favorite colors. It's beautiful, but holy shit, there is such a world beyond that. And as I'm saying this, I just want to say, when we're talking about somatics, this is so much more than just trauma healing and the nervous system. It is a rich rainbow of possibilities of feeling our aliveness. And really, it is the foundation, it is the ground.
Yeah, and that even the most current maps of the nervous system and polyvagal theory and vagal tone and all of that is a map of something that is unmappable, of this field of animate interbeing, of there's no such thing as a nervous system outside of the air and the water and the earth and the fire. And to keep coming back to our embodiment, our movement, our practices of presence as being intimately woven into life.
Mm. I would like to read a little bit more of the practices we're going to be doing in Refugia and the way I wrote this, because I also think this is powerful and perhaps endangered in the world in the 2020s today. Stillness, silence, and spaciousness. Embodied meditation to nurture our grounded, spacious, warm-hearted presence. We lean into the ancient technology of sitting in stillness, silence, and spaciousness. We root into the immense peace of the deep underneath the surface chop. We deepen intimacy with the richness of the present moment. And in that, we take refuge so we can become refuge. This is refuge in presence. And I just want to say, I'm thinking of dear Francis Weller again, our dear friend. We had a conversation once. He's not a meditator. People sometimes think he's Buddhist from the way he speaks about things, but um, he said, "Oh, so when you're meditating, you're controlling your mind, right?" And I was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. No, that is so not even close to anything we're doing in this practice. We're really practicing presence." And I know a lot of meditation teachings can be very sort of mental, like it's very much about working with your mind, which it is. But for us, it's also so important to remember this as an embodied practice. And, it's about this practice of presence and coming back home to, I'm right here. And also remembering this vastness and spaciousness of awareness and the present moment. And this really, what do I want to say? I'm having a vivid memory of when I was, I don't know, maybe 20. I started meditation young, and I remember having recently read one of Pema Chodron's books. My first Pema book was Start Where You Are, completely changed my life as a young person. And she was teaching about how, sometimes with our thoughts, we can be like, I don't know if she said this or if this is just the image that sticks with me all these years later. So, but being like in my reactivity, I felt like I was a dog with a bone or a toy in my mouth that I just, when they won't let go of it and you're like, "Ah." And she said, you can just, it's not even that you have to make yourself let go, but you remember the space. And I vividly remember where I was standing, and I had this, holy shit, there is all this room. And I'm not just in my claustrophobic little experience of my big feelings and my thoughts and ideas about what that means. We don't have to control or get rid of or manage life or thinking or any of that. It's just coming home again to presence in the body and this spaciousness. Like, as Pema says, you are the sky, everything else is the weather. We're also the weather, but when we can remember that we are the sky, it really changes everything. I could be with that moment of reactivity and whatever. I was like the dog with my teeth and something. I was having big feelings about like just I'm coming back to that image of this vast lap of compassion and awareness can hold and make room for all of that, even contradictory energies and feelings and parts to be there at the same time. So just to say, the way we approach meditation is not mind control. It is not taming and managing. It is homecoming. It is returning again and again. And as Carl said, that Tibetan word of gom means getting used to it. Getting used to, oh yeah, let me come back to this present moment and notice there's this spaciousness I can relax into, along with whatever else is happening.
Hmm.
You want to add
That's
to that, or shall I read the next one? Go ahead.
well, what was coming up for me in that is the potential for creativity that can come from that listening. So we have one of our favorite somatic slash Feldenkrais Bibles is Mindful Spontaneity by Ruthie Alon, one of the most beautiful books on embodiment that we've read. And that term of mindful and spontaneity, that there's something that can be emergent and that we can respond to unknown things in creative and beautiful ways. And that's something that has been really alive for me in these last years in working with improvisation in voice with circle songs and musica do circolo, or in improvisational games out of the fighting monkey movement work, and what improvisation, it feels so necessary with all that's happening right now to be totally able to pivot and do something different or an unexpected way, that we're not just following pre-patterned structures, but we are open to the unknown and to our capacity to respond with beauty and joy and grace.
And spontaneity, like you said, I think that's so important, Carl, that this is not about matching a form. It's feeding the roots of our capacity so we can do what we want, you know? And just to quote Moshe Feldenkrais, he said this in a few different ways. You can't do what you want until you know what you're doing. And that requires presence, right? To slow down enough, I mean, somatically to feel like, oh, if I don't know that my right shoulder is jacked up with tension right now, I don't have the capacity to do something different if I want to. And none of that says it's good or bad if your right shoulder is jacked up or relaxed, but growing our capacity for presence lets us have that choice and freedom as adults to do what we want, And if you want to match somebody else's idea of the right way, cool. If you want to be able to be spontaneous, like Carl is talking about, and responsive, cool. This is very much not about fitting into a form, but feeding the roots of your adult presence so you have freedom to do what you want, right? And I will say it's way easier to do what people tell us to do than it is to do what we're describing here. It's challenging. I mean, both Carl and I have had funny stories. Like, we hated meditation the first time we meditated. We hated it. It was terrible. And it's not like, about just enjoying that practice. There's a development of even, I was talking with our group that meditates with us a few weeks ago and saying, like, even when you feel like you're doing it wildly imperfectly, and maybe you're not having a good time, you're growing this capacity for presence, you know? I think that's really important. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, babe. And some people, it's not their practice, So in Refugia, we offer the invitation to join us. And actually, anybody who wants to join us, we are there live 5 mornings a week, holding 2 20-minute sits with a little break in between and sharing invitations for this kind of embodied meditation. And if you're interested in that, um, check it out. It's on our website, embodimentmatters.com/meditation. And yeah, you're welcome to join us. It's a pretty spacious gig. We're not like hard ass fundamentalists. We're friendly people in the practice and happy to share supports with others. So maybe I'll read this next one. One of the practices of presence that we're working with. We talked about this already, but I'll just read how I wrote this. Revive the soft animal of your body. And I want to say thanks again to Mary Oliver for that gorgeous language where in her poem she writes, you only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Her beautiful poem, Wild Geese, highly recommend if you don't know that one already. So, embodied movement practice. And I'll just say, not all movement practice is embodied in the way we're speaking about. It's very possible to use movement as an escape or to make your body an object you're doing things to, which is different than embodied movement practice. Intended to grow more pleasure, less strain, more vital presence, less disembodied distraction, more curiosity, less being stuck with the right way, more free and full presence in this temporary gift of life. And here's a line from Rilke: the flower of farewell is blooming. So let us be here as fully embodied souls while we can. Life is movement, and how we move matters. It's really powerful to bring that mindfulness practice into how we're moving our bodies, not just when we're in our exercise clothes or on the yoga mat or in the workout, but as I'm sitting here, as I'm chopping vegetables, as I'm getting in and out of the car or on a walk or working in the garden, how we move. That's one of the few things we actually have influence over in this life, right? The quality of movement. And it's really 100% an inside job. Nobody else can do that for us. And notice what quality we want to give. I had a strong habit of cranking on myself. I had a strong association of the sensation of trying as hard as possible with being good, a good person, because I'm really trying so hard, and like how radical to notice, oh, I could choose a quality of movement that feels good to the body. And what's amazing is these bodies are such exquisite um, biological organisms that when we tune to that subjective question of what feels better, that improves the quality somatically, movement intelligence wise, how we run, how our foot strike hits the ground, how our posture is. Anyway, I could geek out on this forever. I'm gonna stop talking. See what you want to add, babe.
Both of us good. I was reminded there's the book title and phrase of "the body keeps the score," but I think of it more like the body is the whole game. It's not a scorekeeper. Our movement, our embodiment is connected to the whole matrix of all of our habits, which is such a beautiful point of leverage and learning and kindness when we can begin to pay attention to our movements and free ourselves from the habits of constriction or tension that limit us. That spreads to all of our behaviors and interactions. What we're doing with our eyes, what we're doing with our hip joints or the muscles of our pelvic floor, all of that is connected to everything.
That's so true. I got to bring this quote from William Blake, and this comes to us from Francis Weller because we often talk about this. And our how do I want to say, when he has taught us for many years about soul work. And we always, because we've been embodied practitioners for many years, are feeling it through the body and, sort of translating it through this somatic lens. And when I would talk about embodiment or the body, and he would say, is it different than soul? Is soul different than the body? And he would bring this quote from William Blake: man has no body distinct from soul, for that called body is a portion of soul discerned by the five senses, the chief inlets of soul in this age. So I love that bridge of just, I mean, maybe right now we can open our eyes and notice some color or shape that we see. We can feel through our skin. We can be listening to the sounds. Maybe there's a lingering taste in the mouth or a scent in the air, and understanding this is soul, the inlets of soul through our senses. I
Mm.
also want to name one more thing, which is about presence and embodiment, and tell you that, oh gosh, probably 15 years ago when we were in San Francisco for some training, Carl. Was this actually when we were with Mia Siegel doing a Feldenkrais training? That is when I found out I was pregnant with our son. Just very exciting, sweet memory. And we went to some little shop in San Francisco, and I bought this stop sign. It's still hanging on our porch 15 years later. And it says, just like you see a regular shape of a stop sign, red and white, but it says, "Stop, enjoy your life." And it's still hanging on the porch because I need that reminder all the damn time of like, presence is also an invitation. Like, I just got to bring Rilke back again. Can I recite this little poem? Endlessly. Oh no, here it starts. Somewhere the flower of farewell is blooming. Endlessly it yields its pollen, which we breathe. Even in the breeze of this beginning hour, we breathe farewell. And it just makes me so weepy. And thank you to Joanna Macy and Anita Barrows for translating that one. That is the last entry in that Rilke book they did, where there's one entry for every day of the year. That is December 31st, the flower of farewell. And he also says, um, how does it go? The impermanence that haunts our days is their very fragrance. Like, why are we talking about embodiment and presence? Why does it matter? Because shit, the flower of farewell is blooming. This is impermanent, this chance to be here embodied. And, even with the shit show of what is happening in politics and all over right now, it's important to stop and enjoy your life because we don't know how long we got, you know? Yeah. Mm,
I feel like that's a good pausing place and
mm.
going out the the Rilke and the Blake as our next conversation is going to be about practices for depth and soul.
Mm.
And I love this weaving of how connected the practices of presence are to depth and soul.
And I just got to add, because our other one is going to be reconnection and remembrance. And of course, that is woven out throughout this returning, remembering, homecoming as well. So, oh, thanks, friends, for listening to us. Carl, I love you. I love that we get to continue our decades-long conversation and practice about this topic. And yeah, if you have any draw to join us, check out our upcoming training. It's embodimentmatters.com/refugia, Refugia. We would love to have you along for the journey of practice.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.